Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our online briefing today. This is for Managing Earthquake Risk, Unreinforced Masonry Building Database. My name's Nicola Moore, and I'm the Queensland and Northern Territory Node Research Manager with Natural Hazards Research Australia, or NHRA. And this afternoon's briefing is being recorded, Supriya, I hope, and will be available on the project page of our website, as well as via our YouTube channel. But I'd like to start the session with an acknowledgement of country, and to acknowledge that we're meeting across a range of different Aboriginal lands today. I'm joining from the Turrbal and Yagara country up here in Meanjin, Brisbane. And First Nations people have long looked after and cared for country as kin, and continue to do so today. I'm a guest here on Turrbal and Yagara country, as I am wherever I walk in Australia, because sovereignty has never been ceded. And we can all play a fundamental role in dismantling the ongoing processes of colonisation and supporting Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people on this journey, because after all, we all share the same fundamental goal, and that is of resilient and sustainable landscapes and communities and everything in between. So I'd like to pay my respects to the Turrbal and Yagara people's elders, past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to recognise that these lands and waters have always been places of teaching, research and learning. This artwork here has been commissioned for our Reflect Reconciliation Action Plan, a beautiful piece of work that we're really grateful to Leanne Brooke, who was the artist, for creating the artwork. And it reminds us that reconciliation needs to be embedded in the goals and purposes of the work we do at NHRA. It's called In Our Hands, and you can see in the middle there's an image of an ancestor's hands coming out holding fire. So this afternoon, we're going to go through a few things regarding the project. We're going to introduce you to some key folk, give you a bit of background on NHRA, also talk to the project background and objectives, project outputs, some governance and reporting requirements, the EOI process, and to cover off on questions. It'll provide you with a more detailed description of the project, and it's also an opportunity for interested parties to pose specific questions to assist you with developing your submissions for this current EOI. The questions that you ask here will also be transcribed and shared on the project page under our frequently asked questions for this EOI. And you're all welcome to ask questions at any time via the chat, or you can try raising your hand as well. I can't see you all on my screen, but both my two colleagues that are with us on this presentation can let me know, or we'll let the other presenter know as well. This is going to be an easy flowing, not too formal briefing. The chat is open, use it as much as you like with comments and questions. We will have time at the end if you want to have a bit more Q&A and a bit more discussion. The most important thing today is that you, the researchers, get to ask the questions and clarify aspects for the call for expression of interest. You'll get a good understanding of what we have in mind for this project and the EOI process itself, so that you're in a good position to put in a solid submission. We really appreciate the time and effort that actually goes into putting in a submission, and this is your chance to get what you need from us to support you in that submission. You may also wish to take this opportunity to introduce yourself and your areas of interest and expertise via the chat function. In the case that you might find other researchers online today that might be interested in working with you on a joint submission for this project. Because once our EOIs are open, NHRA is unable to join up interested researchers for joint submissions. So we're really using this as an opportunity for you to introduce yourselves to each other in case you want to do a joint submission. The key folk that you will be dealing with today from our side of the screen. As I said, I'm Nicola Moore, I'm the one in the middle, but we've also got the wonderful Dr. Jane Sexton with us today. Jane's the Executive Manager for Hazard and Risk, and she's with the Queensland Fire Department. And we also have Dr. Supriya Gurung, who's our Research Services Project Officer. And Supriya is helping us run Zoom and do all the back end to support today's briefing. If you're having any technical issues with Zoom, please let Supriya know in the chat and she'll try and help you out. This EOI has been developed from an initial concept from the following end users. And these end users have also provided feedback on the EOI itself and hopefully will continue to play a role in the project. So Dr. Jane Sexton has led this work, but the other key folk that have been involved, and some of whom hopefully will be with us this afternoon on the briefing, Russell Dippy, who's soon to be a doctor, I understand, from South Australia Police, Jeremy Stubbs from New South Wales Fire and Rescue, Graham Hall and Douglas May from Queensland Fire Department, Matt Zanini and Anthony Sadler from the Western Australian Department of Fire and Emergency Services, and Mark Edwards from Geosites Australia. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as well, please. Yep. So a little bit about NHRA. Essentially, we're a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee. We are functioning via a one-off bespoke federal grant for 10 years, and the centre commenced on the 1st of July 2021. Our funding arrangement, or our funding agreement with the federal government, includes some key objectives and also some key conditions for the funding agreement. So essentially, we've got federal funding for 10 years to run nationally significant research focused on natural hazards. One of the key conditions of our funding agreement is to leverage that funding with additional contributions from entities through partnership agreements or participant agreements. And those entities can then access our core research program by submitting project ideas or project concepts. And that's how this project has come about, from a range of end users actually collaborating together, as I just reeled off who they were, to put together an idea for this particular project. That ensures that the research that the centre funds and supports is user-led and user-driven, which is deemed as key for it to be actually used and applied in the end case. So it's a very different model. The centre has a very different model than the former Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC, which where research projects were put up by researchers themselves. Our projects now are put up by our participants. So it's slightly different. However, Natural Hazards Research Australia also draws on that existing knowledge that's been developed up under the Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC, and before that, the Bushfire CRC. So 19 years of work so far, and we're continuing, which is great. So that's a bit of background on NHRA. And what I'll do now is I might hand over to Dr. Jane Sexton from Queensland Fire Department to talk a little bit more about the project itself, where it's come from, and what we're wanting from it.
Thanks again to NHRA for sponsoring this project, and thanks everyone for joining today. That's really appreciated. So just a little bit of background to where this project has come from, and I'm not sure what type of background many of the researchers come from. I can already see that there are some who have got a sort of structural engineering sort of background, perhaps. Some may be well understand the state of earthquakes in Australia. So I'll just start with that to start with. So I guess maybe some people don't particularly know that Australia experiences hundreds of earthquakes every year, and many of them are not felt or result in damage to our community. But on average, Australia experiences a magnitude 5 earthquake once to twice a year, and a magnitude 6 once every decade. This is significant for us. But the point is for Australia is that we have a large continent, and this map here shows that we have experienced many magnitude 5 and magnitude 6 earthquakes across the Australian continent. But they can happen at any time, anywhere, and at any time. And if those particular earthquakes happen to coincide with a location of significance, with high population, high infrastructure, then there's potential for significant consequences to Australia. Perhaps to date we have been a little fortunate in that many of these earthquakes have been in unpopulated areas, but we know all too well about some of the events that have occurred in populated areas. So what really is our problem? I mean, we do know that some of the buildings that are most vulnerable to earthquakes are what we call these older unreinforced masonry buildings. So what we really would like to know from an emergency management point of view is where these buildings are and what the characteristics of these buildings might be. So for an end user, really, why is this in question important to us? Well, these are the ones that are going to be most vulnerable, which might mean that there might be people inside that will need to be rescued and taken out. So we really need to be able to inform our most timely and effective response. So if there's lots of these buildings in an area, we want to know which ones that we should be targeting first. So that helps us understand our vulnerabilities in our community. It may also, perhaps before these events even strike, is an opportunity for us to retrofit those buildings. It also gives us an opportunity to have conversations with those owners to establish business continuity plans, and also gives us an opportunity to exercise so that we are prepared if there is ever going to be an earthquake to hit some of our communities. And that can inform in turn as well to ensure that our community know what to do when there's an earthquake. So why is there a problem? Now, for many of you online, you probably already know this, but the fact is that here in Australia, it took the Newcastle 1989 earthquake before we had a earthquake loading standard installed, which means that the buildings that we live in and work in prior to 1989 were not designed to take earthquake loading as part of their design. So that leaves a huge legacy building stock, and within that legacy building stock, we know that the masonry buildings are going to be the most vulnerable. So just to give some examples, and again, some of you may already be well aware of this, but here are some events that have happened here in Australia, and some of the exposures, or some of the impacts that we have seen. Now, whilst these haven't necessarily led to significant damage, they have led to enough damage to be of concern, and we have been perhaps fortunate that some of these events have occurred at a time of day where there were not a lot of people in the streets that could be vulnerable to those falling bricks, as you can see there. So we have had a few events that have occurred, and the question is really, because we don't know when or where the next big earthquake's going to be, and therefore to know what the impact might be, we want to get on the front foot and make some plans about knowing how to deliver the most effective response. So again, I'm really fortunate that NHRA was able to support this project, because there are many in Australia who do think, why are we investing in earthquakes? But the point is that, yes, they are rare, but they have the chance to give us a high and significant consequence. And this table here that you can see on the screen was put out by the Insurance Council of Australia last year. And this is where they reassessed significant events in Australia and renormalised it to understand what the costs would be should those events occur again today. And what you can see on the screen is that the Newcastle earthquake, which is obviously many years ago now, actually is there at number 3. So it's there above the 2022 floods, which we all know what the significant cost that entailed to the insurance industry. But the Newcastle earthquake is above that again. And just to caveat this particular slide, this is about insured costs. It's not about the total costs to governments and society more broadly. It's really just the insured costs. And for those of you who may not know, is that basically earthquake comes for free in most of our household insurance. It's right. It's just one of the lowest risks, really. And just because I'm a Queenslander, I thought I'd put up the State Disaster Risk Report, which says that we have considered earthquake within our hazards of interest here in Queensland. And I know also that New South Wales has included it in their recent state disaster mitigation plan. So it is something that governments are paying attention to. And so we need to understand what the impacts and consequences might be across multiple sectors. So what do we need? So what I've just talked about is the context of the problem. But what is it that we need? So I just would like to acknowledge here that there has been some already excellent work that has been done already by our collaborators at Queensland University of Technology to develop a database of known unreinforced masonry building structures at certain locations in Queensland. But just absolutely acknowledge that that is already there. But what I would say is that we know that this is not a complete data set for the whole, obviously for the whole country, but also to ensure that we have it for the entire state. So essentially that's what NHRA is doing, is helping to develop this information resource for the entire country and to do it consistently. What we would also like, and it depends, of course, on how the research community elect to solve this particular problem for us, but if there is some new novel, innovative way that is taken to resolve this problem, then we would look to ensure that any approach, and whether that's done in any coding or software approach, is that is able to be shared so that it could be implemented elsewhere outside of Australia, for example. And of course, the methodology by which that is done. So that's essentially what we would be liking. And what we would do with that database of information is bring it into our own common operating pictures so that we have that, so we can build our situational awareness and know where these vulnerable buildings are in our own community. I think that's it for me. Is that right, Nicola?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Jane. That's great. I might open it up and see whether any of the other team members, like Russell, I think Russell Dippy was registered. Is he with us, Supriya?
Russell has not joined yet, no.
Russell has not joined. And who was the other fellow? There was another fellow that was registered.
I think Jeremy's joined. I can see him there. Jeremy joined as a guest.
Yeah. Does Jeremy, did you want to add anything more, Jeremy, to what Jane's talked about in terms of end user requirements?
I didn't have anything to add, but a big thanks to Jane for driving this. So I'm sorry to do it to you publicly, Jane, but it is something that's certainly become an evident risk to a lot of us within the emergency services to identify that if we can identify where these are and have that overlay before we actually respond to our people, that's going to support us in everything we do. So anything that we can do to contribute to this exercise is going to be a value add from an emergency response perspective.
Good on you, Jeremy. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So you can see this is a value to the sector for sure, this project. So we'll go into what the expected outputs are. So Jane and Jeremy have touched on a bit of them, but these are what are actually outlined in the expression of interest. Now that expression of interest we've developed with Jane and Jeremy and others, and we've honed it down to a project plan that's co-designed with the project reference group, which will probably be those folk that have already been involved in the concept and the EOI development so far from the sector. We're looking at holding, well, not perhaps, definitely looking at multi-jurisdictional workshops, a project plan multi-jurisdictional workshops with key agencies to determine the technical needs and requirements for the development of the database and data sets for integration into the current operational platforms Jane referenced. A geospatial database that can be ingested into jurisdictional situational awareness platforms, accompanying technical documentation describing the approach and limitations of the data, literature review, scientific code and software, a final report that will include identification of future research opportunities and applications, a range of stakeholder presentations, relevant conference presentations, and academic publications in high-ranking international journals. So they're the expected project outputs. There's some additional outputs that are run-of-the-mill, if you like, in terms of NHRA's project management processes. And we have quarterly progress reports that the successful research team will need to do online via our turnkey system. We'll also need a project utilisation plan, a project evaluation report, and relevant communications outputs, which will include presentations, posters, and a hazard note at least. But we also really welcome any innovative outputs that your team would like to also include to address the outcomes that this project has listed. So the anticipated outcomes is for this project will be increased capability of emergency services support towards prevention, preparedness, response, recovery, and resilience for earthquake via the integration of that database into current decision support systems and the common operating picture systems used by agencies. And as Jane's referenced some of these already, in the response and recovery areas, this outcome would be providing crucial information to target efforts. For preparation, it will provide consistent evidence base to support capability exercises for urban search and rescue technicians, earthquake risk assessments, exercises at the local, state and national level, considerations for inclusion in national exposure information data sets and national impact forecasting systems. In the prevention and resilience space, it would support informed discussions with building owners to be prepared for earthquake, which may include the development of business continuity plans and the identification of retrofit options, and also support the capacity development initiatives in respective regions. So they're the anticipated outcomes from the project. NHRA is really keen in terms of furthering the user-led approach for all of our projects. Is the research teams really need to consider a collaborative approach. So you'll be expected to undertake the research with our end users involved in this process to assist in the translation and transfer of knowledge to the end users and to ensure that the project meets their needs. We encourage researchers to outline their approaches in the EOI submission that will ensure effective collaboration. It could include embedding researchers within end user organisations for a period of time, depending on how you're going to approach the project itself. In terms of budget and time frame, it's a 2-year project and the total budget envelope for this project is $250,000 to $300,000. This is information, by the way, that's all contained in the EOI itself that's available online. And we've got a few details here on governance and reporting requirements for all of our projects. In terms of governance, we have, if we've got a consortium bid that comes through that ends up being awarded, one of those entities would have to be the lead provider for contract purposes. So if you're putting through a consortium bid, just bear that in mind because you'll need to specify which entity would be the lead provider. The contract will be with NHRA, and we set up project management committees at the project level to provide project level governance for each project. And that will include a lead researcher from the research team, the successful research team. It will include a node research manager from NHRA, which is most likely going to be me. And it will also include a lead end user, or in some projects, we have a group of end users. So it's up to the group of individuals that have put this project together, Jane, Jeremy, and others, as to how many of them would be represented on the project management committee. I suspect that this project might also end up with either a steering committee or a reference group so that we can pull in more end users to guide the project. And there'll be regular meetings of these groups as the project progresses. From the reporting side of NHRA requirements, we need a co-designed project plan. That project plan has to be signed off by the project management committee. It will include milestone delivery. It will include the dates for quarterly progress reports. It will include a project evaluation report and stakeholder presentations. These are all the ways that the project research team will present on the status and progress of the project. The EOI process, we're getting very good at the EOI process. We're in our 4th year now, and our processes are getting a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more well-oiled, I'm pleased to say. We need you to use our EOI submission form and our budget template. Both of these documents, along with some others, are available on the project page. I'll give you a screenshot of that in a minute. But it's a 2-part research proposal process. There's the initial expression of interest submission that you'll put in, and once the project has been awarded to the successful research team, the second step is the co-design of a research plan in consultation with stakeholders. So your EOI submission is your initial thinking about what this project should look like. And then there's an opportunity to adjust it. The successful team will get an opportunity to adjust it with stakeholder input once it's awarded. If you've got any further questions after this briefing this afternoon, please send them through to research@naturalhazards.com.au. And please note that your EOIs must be prepared using our submission form and that they're submitted to that email address by 5 o'clock on Friday, the 25th of October. So 5 o'clock that time is, for the Queenslanders amongst us, is actually daylight savings time. So that's not our time. It would be 4 o'clock our time. Yep. I think I've got that right. I always get confused. So I've just given you a screenshot here of the actual web page relating to this EOI, just because I wanted to show you that down the side here on the right-hand side, you'll see you can download the expression of interest. That's the document that goes into all the detail of what we're looking for this project. Then you've got the EOI submission form. That's the document that you need to fill in, to actually put in a bid for this project. You've also got the proposed form of contract. We need you to look at that as well, because in the submission form, we need you to specify if your research office, your contracts office, needs any changes made to that proposed form of contract. And we've also got a budget template that you can download, and that needs to be submitted along with your submission form. Essentially, it's pretty self-explanatory once you've got the EOI submission, the EOI itself downloaded, and the submission form. That submission form has got little helpful hints as you go through it, and it talks about a statement of capability, including the proposed contributions for each research team member, a statement about the diversity of the project team, about the project's inclusion and respect of First Nations people, philosophies, cultures, rights, etc., describing how the project team intends to approach the project, an indicative methodology, an indicative schedule of work, interim milestones, project outputs as described in the expression of interest, and also additional ones that you would like to include in your submission. The proposed project budget. Within the submission form, you'll see that the proposed project budget is quite high level, but then we ask you to give us a detailed project budget using our template. So there's two versions of budget there. And again, asking you to specify any changes required to the proposed contract form. There's some more there. You will note too in the submission form that there are word limits for each of these sections within the EOI submission form. I need to let you know that we need you to stick to those word limits because we will because we get so many submissions and we need to be fair to everybody, those, especially those that have stuck within the word limits or kept within the word limits, that submissions that go beyond those word limits can be disqualified or omitted from the process. So please ensure that you stick to the word limits that are proposed within or that are provided within the EOI submission form. And also, you can attach to your submission form 2-page CVs for each of your proposed project team members. The EOIs, when they come in, will go through an assessment process. So what we've got here, and it's in the EOI itself, the expression of interest, is the assessment criteria that we will use to assess all of the submissions. And we've given all of them an equal rating of 20% for this specific project. So you're basically evaluated on research capability, your approach to the project, the outcomes and outputs that you've included, industry engagement, and value for money. They're the key criteria. I'm just thinking, I'm waffling on here. Have we got any questions in the chat that we should address straight up? Or are we just doing introductions?
No
Looks
questions.
like introductions and links. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Supriya. So I've done up a slide here. This is our second last slide, essentially. So we've zoomed through the presentation. These are our key dates for this particular project. So the EOI for this project opened on the 23rd of September. We are here on the 8th of October having the online briefing with all of you. And the EOI will actually close on Friday, the 25th of October at 5 o'clock daylight savings time. And unfortunately, we are unable to accept any submissions beyond that date. And so I would suggest that you try and get it in the day before if you can, just in case there's any glitches with the form and the process. And we're hoping to notify applicants of the EOI outcome on the 11th of December, and then support you in working towards a co-developed project plan once we know who the successful team are. That's our intention. We've found that sometimes with the EOI process, these dates can get pushed out depending on what's going on in the background around the assessment process. So that's our intention, is the 11th of December and the 31st of January for the project plan.
Nicola, we've got a question from Tathir.
What is the scope of the database? Should it consider the whole country and all Australian buildings? That's a really good question. Jane, I'm going to handball that one across to you and Jeremy.
Sure. Yeah, so the scope is definitely the whole country. That would be preferable. I think that's the whole goal for every jurisdiction, if you like. And I should have said also that there are other information sources like heritage registers, etc., that do exist. But in terms of the scope for which Australian buildings, the title is pretty clear. This is meant to be around those unreinforced masonry buildings, since they are the most vulnerable. But I wouldn't. That's what we're expecting. Jeremy might want to say something else. There was an additional comment made by one of my colleagues at QFD on whether or not there was any, this is completely up to how people decide to respond to the EOI, whether or not they wish to include some commentary on the vulnerability of buildings that are proximal to these buildings as well, and so whether they have any vulnerability as well. But yeah, essentially what we're looking for are the buildings that are particularly vulnerable, and those are thought to be those unreinforced masonry.
We're open to any other questions that you like, because Jeremy, did you want to jump in? Sorry.
No, I was just going to reinforce what Jane said. I think anything that's developed can be built on into the future, but initially it was the unreinforced masonry across the entirety of Australia.
Thanks, Jane. Is there any existing database of building typologies for masonry?
Well, not that we're aware of, hence why we've come out. That's why there's a project concept here, because nothing exists. So I guess that could be part of what you can present in your EOI.
And searching for what exists, perhaps for a literature review as part of the process, maybe. Yeah, that's great. Well, it's really good to see that some of you have taken this opportunity to introduce yourselves in your areas of expertise. Please, everybody that is keen to put up a joint submission, take note of those folk and reach out to them and see what you can come up with. Are there any other questions that you'd like to ask about this project? Supriya, thank you for putting all the links online as well in the chat. That's really helpful, because we've zoomed through all the slides. We're very early. We've got 15 minutes up our sleeve.
Yeah, all I'd say is I'm really looking forward to what might come out, like what options or what approaches researchers might take to have a look at this. So, you know, I think, as you can see in the EOI, we don't have, you know, Australia is a huge country. We're not going to wander around and look at every building on foot. So clearly we need a different approach to identifying these buildings in a consistent and national and consistently nationally. So yeah, curious to see what comes out of the brains in the research sector.
Tathia made a comment that on the funding, and she has a feeling, they have a feeling that 300,000 is not sufficient to deliver all outcomes. But that's the budget that we've got for the project. So please compile your submission for that budget, because that's what's been allocated. So as much as you can do within that budget, and for all of our projects, you know, you can never fund everything to its end. So whoever is the successful research team will then work with the end users and NHRA to scope the project out in more detail. Hossein, dear all, thank you for the explanations and the research opportunity regarding the available data to be used. Are there data streams that are preferred by agencies like Google Street, satellite data, impact reports, any resources that end user agencies have?
And Nicole, I'm just wondering whether you could just have a look at the next question there about what the usual approach might be.
Yeah, no, we can't. Can we approach end user agencies prior to the EOI as well? Possibly not. That second question, I would suggest not. The reason being is that our procurement processes, which are in line with the federal government's procurement principles, are really quite strict to ensure that there's no conflict of interest, if you like, for submissions that we receive, and that we can evaluate and assess all of those submissions on an equal basis. So unless you've got existing relationships with end user agencies and you're aware of some issues already, and you're aware of some of the systems that are in play already, you can definitely put that in your submission. But I'm not sure that it's appropriate for you to contact end user agencies, especially those that have been involved in the development of the concept. That's for sure. And we've got, I think on the EOI, it lists all the agencies that have been involved. So steer clear of those agencies. Yep.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nicola. What I would say, Hussein, with respect to your first question there, is that just keep in mind that this is national in scope. So I would be thinking about what data is available that is consistently available nationally.
Thank you for clarifying the queries, and all other participants for their introduction. That's wonderful. Ben Benham has asked, are there any additional funds available for purchasing satellite data from private agencies? Oh, that's an interesting question. Probably not at this point in time. I would say that the budget that we've got for this project is the budget that we've got for this project, because it's gone up to our board, and I don't know that we would be able to add any more to the project for that specific point. However, I wonder if that's something that could be considered within the project. I'm just thinking, Jane, what are your immediate thoughts when you read that question?
Yeah, I think, I think purchasing satellite data nationally is going to be super expensive, of course, but I mean, let's just say, for argument's sake, you had to purchase some data for a project, you could do it within the budget scope, then sure, I would imagine you would do that. But I just imagine, given the project budget, that that's going to be unlikely. But I would perhaps then turn that question around and be suggesting, as somebody else has said, it is around whether or not the funding is sufficient to achieve the outcomes. I think then maybe think about what would be your approach to get to those outcomes, and show that through as part of your thinking, and, you know, what you could do, like how far you could get with that $250,000 to $300,000. So sure, we may be ambitious here, but the point is, if you've got to ask a big question and see how far you can get, and if it has legs and merit, then there's an opportunity for other agencies to run with it within their own jurisdictions later. Just to throw look, I'm just going to be absolutely silly, but you can imagine giving some money to grain nomads and getting them to drive around Australia and collect all the data that you wanted. That might be a sort of cheap way of doing it. But anyway,
citizen science, I love it. Yeah. It's a bit like Birds Australia do their bird surveys with a similar approach. Yeah, that's a novel way. That's a novel way. Someone likes that. Yep, Tather likes that suggestion, Jane.
Oh, look, you might get it. I'll remember your name. I mean, there has been similar approaches to that. Basically about how all beaches have been surveyed in Australia. It was done by somebody driving around in their combi. Takes a long time, but cheaper.
I think our questions have dried up. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon and for sharing your details and your interests into the project as well, and for your questions. We will take these questions and craft them up into FAQs that we'll add on to the webpage. That way we're keeping everybody fully briefed, so everybody has the same amount of information regarding the project when to help them put their submissions together. And we look forward to receiving a range of really good quality and innovative submissions for this project. It's really exciting. Please don't forget, it's daylight savings, 5 p.m. on Friday the 25th of October that they're due. So I'll give you back now 8 minutes in your day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.